Stefan, thank you so much for having me to your workshop today. I'm fascinated by all the things I see, all of your kind of tools of the trade, so we're going to talk about that. But first, tell me how in the world you got into ice carving.
I actually went to culinary school to become a chef. That was in '99. I was actually working at a computer firm doing tech support for software and hardware, and looking at a computer screen all day, and realized this is not where I want my life to go. So I went to culinary school. I learned about ice sculpture there. Ice sculpture is a culinary art. And then pretty soon after that, I realized that I loved working with food, but I didn't necessarily want to be around people all day. So, and that that's kind of what culinary entails. So
Ice is cold but quiet. So
yeah, I get to work on my own a lot. So
okay, so at what point did you decide that you wanted to kind of pursue the ice sculpting as a career? It seems like a risky move. Did it feel like that to you?
no, I mean, I was fascinated at first when I first saw my chef do it, and then I just focused on it more and more. I became I kind of described a position to my chefs at the school. I said, why don't I just be the main ice sculptor for this semester, and they were cool with it, so they let me focus on it.
So tell me how you kind of put this career into practice, because I want people to be able to wrap their brains around where they're going to see your pieces.
Sure.
It's at the really fancy buffets.
Yeah, it's Sunday brunches or casinos or
Weddings, maybe? Receptions,
we do
rather?
We do some weddings, yeah, some wedding receptions. Do a lot of alcohol displays, a lot of branding, logos, vodka displays, bars, ice bars. We do a lot of ice bars, that kind of thing. So
Let's talk about the process of ice sculpting, because just being in this space sort of indicates to me how labor intensive it is. We are in a room with vats of ice, a walk-in freezer, lots of power tools,
right.
But also computers with designs.
Right.
So tell me how it begins. You know, you don't just acquire giant blocks of ice,
Right.
you have to make them.
What we do is we fill a horizontal tank full of about right around 40 gallons of water. So that makes each block 270 to 320 pounds or something like that.
So you also then have like a pulley to get the
Yeah,
block
yeah,
of ice
I've got
out?
a chain fall to get it out. Go, yeah.
So you have these giant blocks of ice.
Right.
You were saying that you make a design and then put it on the ice?
Right, yeah, so you make what's called a template.
Okay.
So you make, the block of ice is 40 by 20 inches. So you make a template, which is your drawing, transfer the design from the template to the block of ice. Then we've got the design on there. And then we do the block out. So we take that design and we get rid of all of the parts around it that don't need to be there from a single perspective, from the first perspective,
Okay.
from the first dimension. And then we create a block look or a silhouette so that, you know, anybody who walks in the back of the room and sees it 50 feet away, you immediately know what it is because you've just blocked it out. You've got a silhouette. So now it's a silhouette one way. But of course, that doesn't tell you what that silhouette is going to be when you turn it. So you block it out, and then you block it in. That's the next step. You want to turn it and find out what dimensions. So if you're carving a swan, you know, it's fine to look for like a swan this way, but when you turn it, it's still going to look like a block. So then you got to say, okay, well, the neck is thinner than the body, so you cut the neck down. You find out how deep you want to go on one side to get the neck thin, and then you've got two wings, so you find out where you're going to divide it so that you've got two wings, and then so you block it out and then you block it in. That's called blocking in, when you find out your dimensions, and that's basically turning the block in your mind, okay, turning it in your mind, finding those dimensions and parts, and then you round each part. So it's a process of refining. You round each part, and then you sand it. You know, you refine certain areas, and then you detail it, and then you clean it, and you're done. So
What happens if you over refine? What if you overshoot the thinning of the swan's neck? Does
Sure.
that ever happen? Because once it's gone, it's gone.
yeah, it happens when you're starting out because you don't have the refinement or education or understanding to know this has got to last 8 hours after I set it up, and not only that, but it's got to sit in my car for an hour to an hour and a half or 2 hours, you know, depending on how far the event is. It's got to be transported without breaking, and then be set up. So you learn over time to make things a lot thicker than realistic.
Tell me about the tools you use. Let's start with the blocking out, for example.
Sure. Chainsaw is one of the most efficient tools for blocking out,
Okay.
and that's basically what it's used for. We do have other rotary tools now that are in the last 10 years or so. They've developed bits that can go through an entire block of ice. Those are expensive, but they're great tools. So a lot of people still use a chainsaw. I use both now. And then a whole series of rotary tools. I can show them all to you, but
Sure.
they look pretty crazy. And they've all just been developed for ice.
Really?
So we used to have to use tools from the wood carving industry and bring it over, router bits and straight router end mills.
So from start to finish, how long does the average ice sculpture take? Because again, you are working with some major time constraints.
Right. Well, it depends on the design and how many blocks the sculpture is. I could do a 10-block sculpture or something
That didn't
like
even
that.
occur to me.
Sure. Yeah, multi-block sculptures. Yeah, they could take a while. Ice bars, they're 5 or 6 blocks.
So is there ever a point at which you have to take your unfinished product back into the freezer and let it
Yeah,
harden
often
again?
on a big project, I'm carving it apart and then putting it back, and carving it apart and putting it back. So, and then I do a dry fit in the freezer, meaning all the parts are carved, but I put it all together in the freezer just to make sure it's going to go together on site.
Tell me how that works to get one piece to stick to the other.
Well, water doesn't really get it to stick. What gets it to stick is a freezing temperature.
Okay.
So if you have blocks of ice that are already below freezing and you put water in them, then if you've got sufficient contact area, it's going to stick.
Okay.
So if you rough it up on both sides, I don't want to say it's stronger, but I used to set up these clamshells, and they put shrimp in them, and we'd set the bottom clamshell down, and then we'd rough up the surface of the fuse, and we'd rough up the other surface, and then we'd stick it together, and that creates a little bit of snow and some scratches just for traction, and then we put water in there, and we'd come back and tear down the sculpture 6 hours later, and we'd pick the whole thing up by the top shell, and it was holding the entire thing on just this tiny seam, so it can be very strong.
You mentioned that when you are beginning to learn about ice sculpting that there's quite a steep curve. And you also go to a lot of competitions.
I have done a lot, yes.
You are award winning. How long did it take you to get good at it?
I'm still getting good at it. I'm still learning. The competition helped a lot in a way, just to train my mind to understand different subjects and understand how to implement them in ice. The competition aspect, it doesn't really help you with learning how to carve and deliver ice sculptures, because that's a completely different animal. In a competition, you're really training your mind to understand realistic subjects and how close to real you can take them, because you'd never do that for a buffet. For a buffet, you make a swan and you make the neck really thick and you make the wings pretty thick, but in a competition you take everything as thin as possible to make it look realistic. It's much more artistic, I would say.
Do you ever have the opportunity to watch other ice sculptors work? Because I imagine that there aren't a whole lot of you.
That's a big part of competition, is that you get to see the guy next to you and the guy over here, and you get to train your mind off of what they're doing and learn about their techniques and their ideas, and that's a huge part of learning. Style is the biggest differentiator. So everybody develops their own style. That is, I mean, if you're serious about what you're doing, you're going to develop your own style. The things that you like to do, or, I mean, people would know me. They know I like to carve birds, carve a lot of birds. And people generally like my design, like other ice carvers like my design work, so.
Stefan, thank you for inviting me today and
Sure.
for showing me your beautiful work.
You're welcome.
For more information, visit IndianaIceStudio.com.
Arts in Focus on PBS Fort Wayne is funded in part by